All right, we're going to get into the book review if you guys are ready. If you're ready, put a 1 in the chat. I recently finished the book Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. This is the third Malcolm Gladwell book that I've read of 5 that we own, me and my husband, and I would say that this was the middle. Of the 3 that I've read, I would say this one I give like the middle rating. So I read The Tipping Point. I didn't particularly care for that book. I will say it was the first of his books that I read, and if I was to read it now after getting a feel for his style, perhaps I would have given that one a little bit higher rating as well. The last one that I read was called Blink, and that was much better. That one was the best of the 3. Really, really interesting information in there. So I do recommend that you read a lot of his different books. He's got a lot of interesting information, and when I say the style of his writing, what I mean is that he writes almost entirely in anecdotes or real-world examples of the points that he's trying to make, which makes it a little bit longer to get through from my personal preference. I like books that I can just basically look through the table of contents, get a feel for what the book is about, and read the parts I'm really interested in learning more about and move on. I read a new book every week. If you're new to the channel, hi. You can sign up for my book reviews over at femyoga.com. They're totally free, and I only send out the email 3 times a year. So every 4 months you'll get 1 email from me that has all of the books that I've read with a summary and a review and a link if you like the book and you want to go buy it on Amazon, just to make your life easier. My little catchphrase for that is that I read a book every week, so you don't have to, but you'll still get the benefits. And some of those books will probably stand out to you that you'll be interested in, and then you can read a few more books. I think reading is the key to success, at least in my life. As you can see, it's definitely helped me out a lot. So this book, let's get into it. Outliers, The Story of Success. And he doesn't talk about the importance of reading in here, so what do I know? Okay, now I will say this book started out a little bit slow. And if you're new to my reviews, I kind of just go through the contents and give you a summary of what the book was about. In the beginning, I didn't really know where he was going with this. He was just using a random example of an outlier, which was a city in Italy that a bunch of people moved over to America from that city and made basically made that city again in America, made like a replica of it, because so many people that came over were from that old city, and it was called Roseto. If I'm saying it right, it's Roseto, just 1 T. Roseto or Roseto. I'm not sure. I'm Italian, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And they were basically much healthier than most people, most Americans. And they were studying why they thought that might be. What they found was interesting is that it had a lot more to do with the social network and the community of the place than it did to do with dietary changes or exercise. A lot of the people were overweight, but virtually none of them had heart disease. Now, if I had my husband here on the broadcast with me, I'm pretty sure he would say that he thinks that it's the diet and lifestyle more than the social networks or community. So you'll have to come up with your own conclusions on that. I'm a little torn too. I'm pretty skeptical about most of the information that Malcolm Gladwell provides, because what's funny, this book is specifically about outliers, but most of his stories in all of his books are I would assume might be outliers. So he'll use a story to demonstrate a point, but I kind of feel like a lot of times those stories are outliers. They're not like it's not like a practical example that we can use from everyday life necessarily. So, and you can check out some of my other reviews on his other books if you like. So it's split into 2 parts, I believe. Yep, part 1 is called Opportunity, and part 2 is called Legacy. And he basically uses the same pattern here, where each chapter is based on a certain story, and then he derives points from said story. So the first chapter he calls the Matthew Effect. Now, I don't know if Malcolm Gladwell is religious, but the next book of his that I have on my list to read is called David and Goliath, which, if you're not familiar with Christianity or Judaism, that is a story from the Bible, from the Old Testament in the Bible. David and Goliath, it's a story of a giant and a small boy that beats the giant. But he uses a lot of Bible verses in that book, and same thing here. If you're new to me, I used to be an evangelical Christian, and I am now an agnostic. So I'm a little sensitive when it comes to Christianity, if I'm totally honest with you guys. I'm definitely not 100% objective, like none of us are when it comes to things we have experience with. So it always kind of like, it's hard for me to accept when people use Bible verses to teach things, because I feel like the Bible really was completely created as a manipulative tool of control, and it shouldn't be used as much as possible. Okay, regardless. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Matthew 25:29. Basically saying, if you have something, you'll get more. If you have nothing, you'll lose everything. Whatever you do have, you'll lose. I don't know what the point of that chapter or that Bible verse is, but the point that he makes here in chapter 1 is that we have some ideas about what brings success and what causes success. And we like to think that it's pretty much all within our control. It's a matter of hard work, it's a matter of intelligence, it's a matter of social skills, so on and so forth, and then we can be really successful just by working on some skills or some things. And the whole book is really about how we're rethinking this whole story of success, and why people are successful might not be because they're smart and they work hard, but it might have a lot more to do with who they know, where they grew up, what background they had, what their actual ethnicity or nationality is. These things, where you're from, how much money you make, how much money your parents made, how you were raised, where you were raised, all of these things matter so much more about whether or not you're going to be successful in the world than hard work or being smart. Even though that's what we would love to think, because we can control that. We can learn more, we can educate ourselves, and we can always work harder. I feel like that a lot. Like I could always just push a little harder, and I love that. But unfortunately, it may not be the quickest way to success. I definitely think it's going to be good. It's good to establish a work ethic and do what we can do. I can't be Jewish if I want to be Jewish. I can't, be a genius just because I want to be. And so these things are kind of, actually the genius thing, I'm kind of using that example backwards, because you would think that a genius would have more advantages, and in this book he kind of talks about how they don't. So chapter 1 is about that, about how, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were both born in 1955, and that the time that you were born is so much more important than, again, being really smart or amazing entrepreneur, amazing business owner. It's really that they were just born at the perfect time to be at the right age, at the right time, that they could start businesses and learn about the tech industry. And also, if you think of Bill Gates, he was raised by a very wealthy family. He was introduced to, was it the owner of IBM at a very young age? He was given some, I might be wrong about this, you can fact check this, but it was in this book, something like a unlimited access to a timeshare for his whole entire life, and he got that when he was 13 years old, like gifted by one of his parents' rich friends or something. I obviously don't know all the details of that story, but it's just going to show that he had, the cards were all stacked in his favor. He had a lot of advantages to get him to where he ended up and where he is now. He wasn't, Bill Gates isn't like a self-made rags to riches kind of story, and that most really successful people aren't. Although Steve Jobs is. Steve Jobs did not come from a rich background. But when I get to that chapter, if I can find the story, they do say that, however, Steve Jobs did have still his certain little things that happened to him that really helped him to get to his success. It wasn't all on him. And I think that's kind of the whole point of the story, is that if you really want to be successful, it's not just about working hard and being smart. It's about realizing what really causes success, and then maybe utilizing that knowledge to elevate yourself. So let me not get ahead of myself here. So he's talking about the 10,000 hour rule. Wait, that's chapter 2. Hang on. Okay, so in chapter 1, he also talked about cutoff dates. So I don't know if they have this in every country. I'm pretty sure they do. But in America, there's a certain date that you have to be born by to be enrolled in certain grades or in certain sports teams. And what they found was that in Canada, I believe, in the hockey leagues, that almost all of the kids in the hockey teams were born in January, February, or March. And the reason for that was because you had to have been born by, I don't know, maybe it was like April 1st or so. I forget what the cutoff date was. I'm forgetting what the implication is. I think maybe it was December 31st or something. So what ended up happening was that the oldest kids are better. So they're not, even though you might think everyone's getting the same opportunity, all these kids are 10, they're all in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 10, 5th grade. So they're all 10, they're all in 5th grade, and they're all in the hockey team. Well, the older kids are going to be a lot better. They're just, you know what I mean? The older kids have more advantage. They're more advanced. Their brains are a little bit more developed. Their bodies are more developed. So the kids that are born later in the year or closer to the cutoff date are disadvantaged. And it's not because of anything they did wrong. It's just because of arbitrary cutoff dates that we kind of have to have a structure and a program and a system in place. So that was really interesting. I actually thought that was pretty interesting, that the older you are, the better you are. And that kind of segues right into chapter 2, which is the 10,000 hour rule, which says that once you've put in 10,000 hours to something, you're an expert. You're going to know everything about that. And we could go back to Blink, the other book by him, and talk about how when you're an expert, you can make split-second decisions that are better than amateurs that do in-depth analysis and chemical tests. And just by you being an expert in a field, you're just basically like, you're almost magical. Your powers are like next level. But it takes a really, really long time to get 10,000 hours under your belt and doing something. What I find is that people change what they're doing too often. They don't stay focused. They give up too early. And they don't just keep putting in the time. Stay committed. Stay dedicated. Remind yourself why you got into this. Remind yourself what's in the end for you and why you want that. And just keep pushing until you're at that 10,000 hour level. Because when you are an expert, your life will be easier, your job will be easier, your thought processes will come easier, more naturally, and you'll be more effective and more efficient, which will free up more of your time to learn new skills. He's talking about in Germany, they had to play hockey for 8 hours straight. That it was just basically like that. And then Germany was the best team because they played for 8 hours straight. Basically, whoever works on it the longest wins. So even if you're not the smartest or the most, naturally intelligent business owner, if you put in more hours than your competitor, chances are you're going to win. It's as simple as that. I mean, people ask me, how can I be successful with live streaming? Go live a lot with really good content. And you basically can't lose because other people aren't doing that, at least not now in, May 28th, 2018. So then chapter 3, we get into the geniuses. So you may have heard of Chris Langan. He's a man who is a genius. I think his IQ is about 190. He might be like the smartest man on the earth, according to the IQ tests. And how that didn't seem to advantage him at all. Right now, I believe he lives on a farm with his wife. They have farm animals, and he spends a lot of time studying and doing, intellectual work. But his whole life struggled. He wanted to go to college. He had a really hard time getting into college. He had not getting in, but there's you can read about Chris Langan online, honestly, and learn all about his story. He was born very gifted and he was born a genius. However, his father left immediately, so and is rumored to have died in Mexico. And then his dad, his mom had 4 different kids with 4 different guys. The father of the last child was the one that ended up kind of raising all 4 boys with them, but he was very violent and he would beat them up. So one day, Chris, he was I think he started working out for a while, and one day he just knocked that guy out, the dad, and that guy left. So he was from a very rough background, as you can hear and imagine. Then he wanted to get into college, and he was accepted. I think he might have even gotten scholarships because of his intelligence. However, when he got there, he lacked the social skills to be able to get what he needed to function properly. So he had lost his car, so he couldn't come into morning classes, so he wanted to switch to night classes because he could get a ride from his neighbor or something. And they wouldn't do it. They told him, well, obviously, you don't realize that it's going to take sacrifice to be successful. And he quit. He dropped out. So he's a college dropout. And this is the smartest guy in the world. And he just basically gave up on formal education because of its structure. And now if you think about it, there's some weird stuff about that story. Like, why wouldn't they let him switch to night classes? I can almost guarantee they would have let me switch to night classes. And it's probably because of the way that he navigates. He knows he's the smartest person on the earth, and he probably acts like that, and why shouldn't he? I mean, he is the smartest person, so he probably kind of carries himself that way, like, no one can think like I can think. Everyone I'm talking to is basically an idiot in comparison to me, and he probably gets frustrated and impatient and doesn't have good social skills, and people probably don't like him very much, so what they do is they treat him worse than he deserves to be treated based on, fairness, all things being fair. So if you are a genius, you also have to be pretty socially talented to actually have that be somewhat of an advantage for you. So yeah, he has an advantage when it comes to theoretical physics, probably learning languages, learning instruments, and that doesn't really lead to a very successful person. He lives a very quiet life, and he likes that too. He doesn't like big crowds. Reminds me a lot of my husband, if I'm honest. My husband is a very extremely powerful thinker, struggles with social skills, I would say, at least a little bit, and I have a hard time understanding what he's saying sometimes, and I can see how that's hard for him in his daily life and his friends and family and how they try, and it's hard. So you would think if I was just really, really smart, my life would be easier. Well, actually, it might be harder because you might have a harder time integrating into society and into friend groups. And really what they're learning here is that there's a certain level at which it doesn't really make a big difference. There was somewhere my husband read that once you make $70,000 or more in the year, pretty recently, it might be like a little more than that now, that you don't get significantly much happier after that point. That from like 0 to 70, that actually you do experience some elevation in your life and your happiness, your standard of living. But once you get to 70,000, it's kind of like the happy, you could go to 80, 100, 200, you could have $1 million a year, and it's almost the same, that you kind of like hit a plateau. And same thing with IQ. I think there's a pretty big difference between someone with a 100 IQ and someone with a 130, but over 130, it's kind of like, whether you have 131 or 200, you're basically, you're a genius. You're an extreme genius that no one can understand, so good luck. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, even if you're at 200, well, the guy at 131, like, I can't communicate with either of you. It's not like, there's a big difference. So that's kind of something that we just think, if we can get better, if we can improve our skills, that's always going to turn into a reward, effort versus reward. That's actually in this book. I hope I can find it. There's 3 things. Let's see if I can just remember it. There's 3 things that most people say they must have to report their work as satisfying. One of which is that direct correlation between effort and reward. I'll have to look up what the other 2, because to me that really rang true. Like when I work really, really hard on my business and my channel here, and I don't get a lot of sponsorships on the website, and I don't get a lot of super hearts coming in, and not a lot of people are subscribing, it's just like, it just seems like, I'm putting in all this effort, but where's the reward? Like, where is that payoff? And when it does happen, when I have a week where I'm working and I'm getting all these new followers and we're hitting all these milestones back to back to back, kind of like this past week, it's like, okay, there's the reward. We put in a lot of effort. We got a little bit of a delay on the reward there, but okay, there we go. There's our reward. It really does give you that feeling like, all right, what I'm doing is working. What I'm doing is making sense, and I'm not wasting my time and my energy and my, mental power on something that people don't even value. So thanks for supporting the channel. That helps me to know that my work is paying off. So there's two whole chapters about geniuses. And then chapter 5 is called The 3 Lessons from Joe Flom. Oh, yeah, and he was a lawyer in New York City. I forget what year, but what I thought was really interesting was that in this chapter, what he teaches you, I think there's three lessons from this guy. The first one is the importance of being Jewish. I was talking with one of my friends in the past few months, and he brought this up to me before I ever read this book. And I thought I had never heard that before. The importance of being Jewish? I didn't even know that was a real thing. Like, I've heard people say that, like, all the big movie producers are Jewish, and a lot of the, like, upper echelon of, like, all different industries are all Jewish, and maybe Jewish people are going to take over the world. But it kind of just is like, I don't know, conspiracy theory. It just seems a little bit silly. You always hear, I mean, personally, maybe this is a millennial thing, but, you know, I kind of always viewed the Jewish people as, like, disadvantaged and rejected by most cultures, and they're from such a small, like, area of the world. It's just like, how is it so important to be Jewish? But it is. Yeah, my friend was saying the same thing, that they're, and kind of similar, going back to the people from Roseto in Italy, is that the community, the social networking, you know, there's something very, like, if you're Jewish and I'm Jewish, okay, I might not even know you, but we're on the same team. I think that a lot of people have reported this with African Americans as well. I saw Periscope. Mike Tends to Travel. If you don't follow him, check him out. Or maybe it's M Tends to Travel. I think he changed his name. I don't know if it's M or Mike Tends to Travel. He's a traveler. He travels all around. And he's African American. And he actually did a broadcast the other day called, like, Why Black Men Acknowledge Each Other on the Street. And it's a similar kind of concept where it's like solidarity. It's like, I don't know you, but we're on the same team. And it's similar. Now, being black is actually, in a lot of ways, a disadvantage. According to the data, that, you know, things like I think affirmative action might be coming in the future. Let's just focus on one thing at a time. I'm trying not to be too disjointed about this. So let's just focus on, so the importance of being Jewish is one of the lessons from this guy, that you can go be a lawyer, but if you are a Jewish lawyer, you're much more likely to be successful, according to the data. And we'll get into the other part I was just going to talk about with affirmative action and all that too. But let's finish the 3 lessons from this chapter. Lesson 2 is demographic luck, which I actually already touched on as far as the year and month that you were born, making a difference as to whether you'll be successful. Okay, here we go. And then meaningful work. So this is the part where they talk about the 3 things that you need to have meaningful, satisfying work. So I'm going to just be kind of looking through this while I talk. They're talking about the garment business and the Jewish immigrants running the garment business in the days of the early immigrants. Okay, those 3 things: autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward are, most people agree, the 3 qualities that work has to have if it is to be satisfying. So we talked about the connection between effort and reward, and then autonomy means independence, freedom, the ability to do your work how you think it should be done, when you think it should be done, you know, rather than having like a really overbearing manager. So also this would be maybe working for yourself would be the best autonomy you could have. And complexity. So if your job's too easy, too simple, too repetitive, too redundant, too mindless, too tedious, it's not going to feel meaningful or satisfying to you at all. It's got to be a little bit challenging for you to feel like it's worth your time and your effort and your energy, you know. And for your boss to feel like it's worth paying you if you aren't working for yourself, or your customers to pay you if you are. All right, so those are the 3 lessons from that part. That concludes part 1, bringing us to part 2, called Legacy. This chapter again. There's a few chapters in this book that I kind of was like, it's not really interested in sharing this with you guys. I really don't think I didn't really learn anything from it, so feel free to buy and read this book yourself. So here we go. Chapter 7, The Ethnic Theory of Plane Crashes. And I think in here, I want to see if I can find the find the affirmative action information. So they were talking about how, let me just find it so I don't have to say the wrong thing. They were talking about why affirmative action programs get criticized a lot. And it's basically because if they didn't change the requirements and lower the requirements to get into the college, that it would be like 99% white students. Or maybe it was like white and Asian, because they talk about actually why Asians are good at math in here too. This book seems like it's kind of racist, but and that's the thing, is we're so shy about looking at the truth and the facts and the data and saying, okay, well, what does that really mean? Why do we have to be completely colorblind? Is someone getting an advantage for being white? Is it really going to benefit us to just act like that's not happening? No. So they took this, that's why they kind of did affirmative action, so that they could have a more diverse and more representative of the population in the schools. But it turns out that so I forget the numbers and I'm not seeing it right here, and I don't want to spend too much time flipping through pages, but let's just say that it was something like 18% of the students are black in the college, and they estimated that without the affirmative action programs, there would be like 2% or less. Like I said, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was a significant difference. And that's kind of why they criticize them, because they're thinking like, well, why would you say that the white kids have to get a 90 on the test and then the black kids only have to get a 70? It's kind of like this weird, it's almost like in a way you're kind of saying that the African Americans can't, do this, that they can't perform up to the same standards. But at the same time, when you look at the data, if they didn't do that, there'd be 2% blacks in the school, which is completely not like the world that we live in here in America. Again, this is America. I don't know the populations of other countries, and I'm sure I'm saying some wrong things here, but I'm doing my best. So what they found, though, was that it really didn't matter. Like, the people who did the best in school didn't necessarily do the best in life. And that if you got a really, really high score on the test, it made virtually no difference to if you were successful in life. And that the kids who, needed like special, treatment to be able to get into the school did just as well, and if not better, when they got out into the world than the people who, seemed like they might be more suited for success. So what I think that picks up on, and he didn't touch on this unless I missed it, is that there's something wrong with the school system. It's not that African Americans are dumber than Caucasian Americans. Something's wrong with the testing here. We're testing for the wrong things. We're testing how good are you at English and, advanced calculus math. And it's like, if English is your first language, you're probably good enough at it. You probably don't need to take 13 years of school about Shakespeare. I mean, it's ridiculous, the kind of stuff that we do in our schools. And I think that was more my takeaway from this than that there was something wrong with affirmative action. I don't really know what his point was to say that. Was that, okay, so if your performance in school is not indicative of your future success after school, then what the hell is the point of doing good at school if it's not going to mean you do good at life? You know what I'm saying? So, okay, maybe I get a little triggered when I talk about the education system. Christianity, the education system, here are two of my triggers. Let's see how many triggers we can get in one broadcast. Okay, so then they talk about plane crashes in here as well. Now, I don't know, I think I'm probably jumping around a little bit in the book, but this was the most stressful part of the book for me to read, because he literally put in the transcripts of plane crashes. So you're reading the words, like the pilot, the first officer, what's the other? There's another position. There's like 3 people that are kind of in charge of this on the plane. The flight engineer, I think it's called. So these, and it would be the conversation between these 3 before the plane crashes, which is really, it was stressful. Maybe, like I kind of mentioned this earlier, I'm a bit emotional. I'm kind of PMSing right now, so maybe it was just me being extra sensitive, but damn, that's like so, it's really hard to read it. You want to just jump into the story and take the what do you call it? The steering, whatever it is. It's not really a wheel, but whatever. You want to take it, and you want to take control, and you want to save everyone's lives, and you want to tell them to stop being stupid and saying stupid stuff right before they kill a bunch of people. But you can't. All you have to do is just read the book and freak out. Okay, so the reason that he shares the transcripts is because in some percentage of plane crashes, the first officer, I think I'm saying the right words here, this is how I'm using them. I don't know if this is right, but I'm thinking of this as there's the pilot, who's the main person flying the plane. Then there's the first officer, which is like the co-pilot, and they're there to take over if the pilot needs, to run to the bathroom or needs a little break, and they're there. They're like second in command. They're sitting next to the pilot. They can take over control at any time. They're also trained to take over control when they are 100% convinced that the pilot is making a bad, dangerous decision. They are supposed to take over. What they've learned is that when you have the more experienced flyer in the pilot seat and the less experienced in the first officer seat, you see the rate of plane crashes go up. And the reason for that is because the less experienced person isn't comfortable saying that he thinks the more experienced person is doing something wrong. And he goes and he explores other cultures are even way worse at this than Americans. I mean, Americans aren't really known for biting their tongues. But Koreans, Chinese, in Singapore, there was 2 other countries that they mentioned that it's an honor society. The elders are extremely revered and expected, and you are not to speak. Sometimes you're not to make eye contact. You aren't to make certain gestures, and you are not to question their decision making for sure. So when you have this kind of culture and they're in a cockpit, the first officer is like, what the hell? This pilot is making bad decisions, but they can't speak up because culturally they're not supposed to. So in a way, that made me even more grateful that I was born in America and that I'm an American. And if I think someone's acting cray, I'm going to call them out on it. I'm not going to let them crash the plane, I would hope. But it's a whole different thing when you're up there in the air and you are thinking in your head, okay, well, if I take over control right now and I say, hey, sorry, buddy, but you're not listening to me, you're being crazy, I'm going to take over, boom, take control of the plane, and then be wrong. And then you made the wrong call, and then you crashed the plane, or you just were wrong, and it's just a little embarrassing, and the pilot's like, what were you thinking? That was the worst call, and you get reprimanded, and you might lose your job, and you just, so the takeaway from this is to switch those roles. Put the less experienced flyer in the pilot seat and the more experienced in the co-pilot seat. Because what happens is that the more experienced person has no worries about saying if the newbie is doing something wrong. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of cool. And when you read it, people do hints. Like they wouldn't say, like the first officer would never come out and say like, sir, I think I think we should do something different here. I think this is what we should do. Here's the problem. Here's what we should do. Never. Not in these transcripts anyway. They would be saying something like, oh, the weather sensor seems to be helping us a lot today, instead of like a tired pilot trying to use his eyes to land the plane rather than the sensors or the dials. What's the word that I'm looking for? The monitors. And there was a few, what was the other one? Like, about fuel. Like they were running out of fuel, and the guy would be talking to, what do you call the people that are on the ground that manage the flights? Air traffic controllers. So he was talking to them, and he was just like, if you read it, you get so frustrated because he's like, oh, we're running low on fuel. But literally, they're like on E, the plane's about to crash. But he never tells them that. And the captain, the pilot, keeps asking him if he told them. He's like, did you tell them we're out of fuel? And he was like, yeah, I told them. But he didn't. Like, he just said, we're running low on fuel. I think we're running out of fuel. But it was like it wasn't like, we're out of fuel, we need to land this plane now. There was no, like, he didn't feel confident to exert himself. And they were also saying that the air traffic controllers are one of the most stressful jobs in the world. There's actually a good movie, Vince Vaughn movie about that. The name is escaping me, but if you know the name and if you're in the comments, you want to comment that in for somebody, it's a good movie, I thought. And because it's so stressful, they're often very they're high energy. So they're like, all right, I heard you. You're running out of fuel. All right, I'm going to get you. You have 18 miles. You're going to go land at this other airport. And the guy even asked him, do you have enough fuel to get there? And the guy said, yeah, I think so. Which is like 100% certain they knew that they did not have that. So, and they crashed, you know? And it's just like, so that's, speak up, you guys. And then he gets into something else interesting here. Again, I'm kind of just going on my own now without looking at the book, but he talks about this part for me was the biggest aha moment for me personally in my life, and reflecting on why I am the way I am and whether I'll be successful or not, was this part here that we got to after that, which is about the way that you're parented. And low income families versus like middle class families, more on the, not even talking about like rich families like millionaires kids, like just like middle class, upper middle class, and lower class. Well, lower class families, what they tend to do is they give the main difference that they found was that upper class kids, upper class parents took a lot more interest in their kids' free time than the low class parents, the lower income parents did. So the lower income parents, and this is more where I came from. Now, my mom wasn't complete. If she had been married, I probably would have been considered middle class. Like, I wasn't from, like, you know, the projects or anything. But it was, like, if you lived in this area and I told you the town that I, like, lived in and grew up in, you would make some snap judgments based on, like, that area. It's not one of the nice areas around here either. It's not the worst, it's not the nicest, it's on the side of the worst, though. And, so I noticed this a lot. What they do, what the lower class parents do, is they think that the adult life should be separate from the kid life, and for me, I was the result of a single parent, single mother. So she worked, you know, and it was me and my sister. So she worked for two parents for two kids. So really, in a way, kind of like for, you know, three parents, because we have different dads. And she would be exhausted, so she didn't want to, like, cart us around to violin lessons and guitar lessons and soccer practice and all these other language lessons, singing lessons, all these things that the richer middle class kids get to do more of, or almost are sometimes forced to do more of, because their parents are realizing that they need to be involved in their free time as well. Because if you just let kids go completely free, they don't really learn how to interact with adults. They don't learn how to interact in the world. They only learn how to interact with other kids, which doesn't really help them. And then they're being influenced mainly by other kids, which is also not the kind of people you want raising your kids, because those are kids. Those kids don't know anything more than your kid knows. And if they do, it might not be something you want your kid to know yet or ever. And you know what I'm saying? Like, so what we did is we would do imaginary games. That's pretty much all I ever did as a kid, was played pretend. I had a PlayStation. Like, I wasn't, like I'm saying, you know, I'm not trying to say I was like living out of a box. I mean, I had PlayStation. Well, I didn't have a PlayStation though until we moved in with my grandmother, which actually was not in this area that I'm talking about. So if I think about the area I had Guitar Hero. I think that was a PlayStation game. So I had some stuff. But mostly we would just play pretend. We would do, like, okay, let's pretend to be teenagers, or let's pretend, like, play house kind of stuff, or let's pretend like we're in an office and we're doing, like, work. I mean, I don't know if that's just more of a girl thing than a guy thing, but that's all we really did. Because, and now I did have, I was enrolled in soccer, acrobatics, dance, cheerleading, clarinet, viola, piano. Like, again, my mom, it wasn't like I had nothing. And I think I'm actually kind of, I border between the two, even though the area that I was living in was definitely low. My mom is very much borderline into the upper middle class, even on her own, without having the support of another income from the father coming in. It's so hard when I talk about my own personal life, because that's like, I don't want to, like, say too much. I don't want to, like, offend anyone, but I am going to share this story because I think it's pretty insightful. So I was taking guitar lessons, and my mom picked me up after my guitar lesson one day, and we were driving home, and I got into the car, I started crying, and she's like, what happened? What's wrong? And I was emotional. I was crying, and I'll tell you why. But I was crying, and I didn't want to talk about it yet because I was like, I was still distraught. I was in the middle of crying, and I had kind of like held it and wasn't crying in the guitar lesson. So as soon as I got in the car, like, ah, and I was just crying. I was like, hang on, let me finish like crying a little bit. I can't barely talk. And I was just like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, and I had a strained relationship with my mom too. So I probably just didn't want to talk about it with her, period. Well, the reason I was crying was because guitar had gotten hard. I'm pretty smart, and when I first learn something, I usually pick it up pretty quickly, quicker than most people, but then I get to a certain plateau where I really have to practice and put the work in and the time in to actually get the benefits. And that's where I was at this point. I was hitting that wall where I was realizing that I wasn't practicing my guitar at home, and my teacher was starting to notice because he was like, you know, if you're not going to practice, every week is going to be this. We're going to be learning it over again. We're not going to be making progress and learning new songs and all this stuff. He did a great job. I think he handled it well. And he made me feel that pressure that if I want this, it's on me, which made me cry. I was like 12 or 13. I'm probably going through puberty. Who knows? I'm crying. No big deal, you know? Like, it happens. And my mom's assumption, because I didn't tell her why I was crying, her first thought and what she thought was happening was that I had just gotten molested, that I had just gotten touched. And when she said that to me, she asked me, did he do something to you? I was completely disgusted and appalled that she would even think that, because I was, you know, I hadn't ever done anything sexual, and I didn't have, luckily enough, I didn't have any of that happen to me in my life. And I was just like, ew, Mom, what the hell? You know, and it just made it worse, and like kind of drove like a little wedge between our relationship further. And what I realized looking back, I had this aha moment as I was reading this book yesterday, that was such a golden opportunity for her to teach me a really, really important, valuable lesson that she failed to teach me. Now, again, nobody's perfect. Okay, my mom was really, really, really awesome, and I'll say how she helped me right after this. But I think what could have happened there was that she could have said the importance of not giving up. Ask me, why did I want to learn how to play guitar? Suggest, maybe maybe you're just not excited about this song that he's teaching you because he picked the song. Maybe ask him if you can learn a song that you'd be more excited about learning because you could show off to your friends more, and you'd be more like practicing it more because you like the song more. It'd be more energy around it. All these things, but instead she just let me quit, and that was the whole trend of my childhood. Now, I would think, especially as a child, I definitely don't want her to force me to not quit. If I want to quit, I want to quit. I like the freedom. But that is an issue here, because she wasn't teaching me that quitting wasn't the only option. She did tell me that I seemed to be quitting a lot, but I didn't know why. You know, things would get hard, I would give up, and she would let me. So I would say, okay, cool, life is easy. And if I just gave up on everything my whole life, I would not be sitting here right now talking to you guys. I needed to learn that there is a reward at the other side of the hard work, and that it's hard right now, but if you stick with it and you keep going, you'll get to that point where it's really easy, like we talked about with the 10,000 hour rule. But we never really had that talk that I recall. You know, kids, they don't always listen. So maybe she said that to me and I totally missed it. It's possible. But I felt like that moment was, all I remember was being like so embarrassed, because then I felt like I was crying for no reason because I didn't just get molested or raped or whatever, and I felt like that would have been the only reason to be upset. Because then she was like, oh, you're just upset because playing guitar is hard and you won't give up. You know, and I'm like, yeah, like that's what I'm dealing with as a 12-year-old girl right now that didn't just get raped. Like, I'm upset because my guitar playing is difficult, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to do the work. Like, so that is interesting to me. And what they found was that these higher class kids are more comfortable with authority and questioning authority. Now that my mom helped me with a lot. My mom is someone who's not afraid to speak up, and maybe to a fault, but I've definitely learned that from her. I would ask my teachers all the time, why do I have to learn this? I don't understand. Why am I being forced to be in this room and learn crap that I'm never going to use in my life? And then I have to pass a test to prove to you that I'm worthy of leaving this room? I mean, what the hell? You know, I mean, that was me. Like, I was just like that when I was a kid. And that I definitely credit to my mom. So in a way, she infused different things into me. But most lower class kids, if they go to, and I do remember this, like doctors, dentists, this I was more uncomfortable with. They'll go there, and the lower class kids, they won't make eye contact, they don't really talk, they're a little bit scared, nervous, they don't feel comfortable because of the authority. And the higher class and middle class kids will ask questions. They'll tell the doctor, oh, I have some bumps on my arm, I'm not really sure what that is, and have a full conversation, almost like an adult with the doctor. And that's the advantage, is that the more well-off parents are able to give their kids what he calls in the book entitlement. I know entitlement is kind of like a bad word nowadays, but he's saying it's good because they feel like they have the right to ask questions when it comes to their own, what's impacting them. In the case of you're flying in a plane that someone's about to crash and you have the option to save it, it affects your life. You might as well. Same thing with anything that's going to affect you. If you feel entitled to take control over it or ask questions about it and not be afraid and intimidated by every authority figure, you're going to be more successful. Congratulations. So, that's probably everything in the book. Let me just scroll through and see if I missed anything. Ooh, yeah. Why are Asians good at math? It turns out that the Asian languages take much less time to say each number. So what that enables, especially in is it Cantonese or Mandarin? I think it's Cantonese, but it might be Mandarin, but one of the Chinese dialects is so short that they can memorize number strings up to about 10, and I think Americans are more like 7 and maybe even less. And it's because our numbers are so weird, the American English, or not even American, but the English number system. So let's go over it together. 1, 2, 3, and if you actually measure the time it takes to say things like 3, it's just longer than for them. It's like you know what I mean, like one of their, it's like it's just so quick, like the way they talk. It's like see. And so it's just, for something, because of your brain, because it's all happening so much faster, it's easier to remember and retain. So we basically just screwed up with our number system, and if we can figure that out, we could be a lot better at math. This whole Common Core thing isn't going to change our mental capacity for memorizing long numbers, and nothing, really. There's really nothing besides changing the language, changing the actual names of the numbers, which is a tall order. So if you think you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then you have 11. I don't know what that means. 11? 11 has nothing to do with ones or tens. It's just 11. It's long too, 11. It's 3 syllables long. And in Asian cultures, they just call it 10-1. And then like 21. Just like we do. We do 21, 22, 23, 31. All of that is the same. But with the teens, we switch it. We say 13. Instead of saying like teen 3. Or 10-3, we say 3-10, 4-10, 5-10, 6-10, 7-10, 8-10, 9-10, and then we switch it to 20, which again isn't 2 tens, it's 20. It's another word that kind of sounds like 2, but not really. Same thing with 30. It's kind of like 3, but again, not really. 40 is pretty good. 50 is close. 60 is good. 70 is good. 80, good. 90 makes sense. It's like some of them make sense, some of them make no sense. And it's I didn't never notice that before. We do like 21, 22, 23, but then we have 13, 14, 15, 16, which is backwards. So also what this means is that our children take significantly longer to learn how to count and to learn math than Asian kids, because their system makes a lot more intuitive sense and they don't have to memorize about 100 new words just to count. They only have to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then realize that after 10 comes 10 plus 1, and then another plus 1, and then plus another 1, and plus another 1, and plus another 1, and that's all they really have to remember. It's pretty freaking easy. Okay. All right, I'm getting a little too intense. They also talk about rice paddies and how the rice paddy culture is very, 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 very difficult. In order to build, it's not like wheat and corn farming that we have here in the West. They have to actually carve out giant paddies from hillsides. Whereas fields, you just like, you clear the trees and you clear a field. This, you have to actually carve out like a big terrace out of a hillside. Then you have to dig irrigation trenches to get the perfect amount of water at the right times to go there. You have to build a clay, like a big, you basically have to fill in the entire thing with clay so that the water doesn't just fall through the dirt. And then you have to make sure that the clay is deep enough that you put enough soil in it to actually grow in. So it's all got to be like the perfect level. And then to basically run the rice paddies successfully, you have to get up before sunrise every morning. And in the Asian culture, in some of the Asian cultures, one of the sayings and kind of old parables of their society is, the man who wakes up before the sun 360 days a year will not fail to make his family rich. So it's a whole culture of extreme hard work, dedication, becoming rich, supporting your family. I mean, it's a whole different culture than we have in what we're dealing here in America. Well, I mean, now rice paddies probably aren't really as common now as they were at one time, but just to say, like, our history, you know, if you look at the European culture, it just wasn't as hard to farm as it was in Asia. So they are just used to working harder. It's easier for them to get through things that we consider to be hard because they're tougher than us, virtually. So, kind of cool. Rice paddies and math tests. I think that's it. Let's see. At the end, he talks about himself and his background and how his mom is Jamaican, which makes sense because I was always wondering why he had a huge afro, because he looks white. That's the end of the book. I love how I'm finishing that. So, this was Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Story of Success, our third book from him that we've read, and the next one I'll be reading will be David and Goliath by the same author. I hope you enjoyed this book review, and remember, you can sign up for my book reviews and summaries email at femyoga.com. And while you're there, if you want to support this channel to keep this content going and growing, you can click support. And if you sign up for monthly sponsorships right now, you'll be entered to win $100 in June of 2018. So thanks so much for making this show possible. Hope to see you on the next one. We're not going to have time for yoga and meditation later. Why isn't this working?